We all intuitively know that good food is important to us. It's central to our health. But a lot of us feel lost. We're unsure of what we should eat, when we should eat it, and the implications if we deviate from those recommendations. Today, I have an amazing guest in store, Stanford Professor Christopher Gardner. You might remember him from the Netflix show, You Are What You Eat. Chris has spent the last 20 years investigating diet and its links with chronic disease. Today, our aim is to simplify nutrition. Not everybody is ready for this conversation, but if you are ready, get ready to go deep. It's Professor Christopher Gardner. Professor Christopher Gardner, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Anthony.
How are you today, Christopher?
I'm feeling pretty good. Start of a new week, research to do, papers to write, students to teach.
Are you much of a podcast listener?
Not as much a podcast speaker, but I think I will be more so, right? It's a fascinating thing. I'm on a lot of podcasts and I don't listen to a lot of them, but part of that because I don't go for long bike rides or long runs. I ride my bike all the time back and forth to work and I run, but I don't go for the long runs talking to Rich Roll one time in his insanely long podcast, I say, who listens to you? He says, well, people going for long runs and long bike rides.
Exactly. Well, like I always say to people, and friends will ask me advice on how long should a podcast be. And I said, like, if it's 5 minutes and it's terrible, it's too long. If it's 4 hours and it's amazing, it's probably too short.
Yeah.
There's a podcast this part of the world, Diary of a CEO, that is quite popular. And, I dip in and out of it and I'll watch an occasional episode. I have big admiration for how the guys have built the brand. But recently they've got a lot of criticism on the podcast because they have your area of expertise, nutrition. They'll have 5 or 6 different nutritionists on, but they will have 5 or 6 totally different perspectives on nutrition. Is there strategies you could recommend to individuals who are listening to this to try and discern credible information from not so credible information?
Oh, yeah. That's a great ask. Certainly somebody who does studies is somebody better than sits in an armchair, but I'm saying that very selfishly because I do studies. And a tip, maybe not so much on the credibility of the speaker, because I think you could look at their credentials. But actually, one of my themes right now, Anthony, that seems to resonate with a lot of people is there's really a lot more consensus out there than it would seem. And there's 2 tricks: with what and instead of what. So if it comes to, Professor Gardner, is this thing good for me or bad? I always say it depends. Tell me with what. What are you having it with? And what are you having it instead of? So let me give you just a super benign idea. Coffee. Gosh, Professor, I heard coffee's bad for me, but boy, I really love coffee. And I was thinking of switching to tea, but what should I do? And I said, I don't know. What do you have in your coffee? And if it's mocha frappuccino, and it's basically a sugar and dairy fat delivery system that's flavored with coffee, you should have the tea. But there's some teas out there like bubble tea, boba tea. I have some teenage boys and man, they are chugging that stuff down. And it's, again, another dairy fat and sugar delivery system, as opposed to just Japanese green tea. So is coffee or tea better? Wow, you could answer that pretty quickly if you said, plain black coffee, plain Asian green tea. Actually, both of those are fantastic. Lots of data to support both of those, for which there will never be a randomized trial to completely, unequivocally show if they're good or bad. Think of you. Would you volunteer? Hey, Professor Gardner, you're curious if coffee or tea is good for you. I would agree to be in a randomized study and either drink coffee for the rest of my life or avoid it for the rest of my life. No one would sign up for that. So hopefully with what instead of what could be a clue, and then looking for credentials for people who have the background.
It's a nice filter, actually, because I find we get distracted in whether it's coming into a political year, your part of the world, which is highly divisive, and we're getting a little bit of spillover into our media from it. But whether you break it down as right versus left, or you break it into these almost religious or tribal groups we see within diet, I'm carnivore, or I'm Mediterranean, I'm vegan, there's actually much more in common with all these dietary philosophies or political philosophies than there is opposition. We largely agree on a lot of stuff, but we get focused so much on the minutiae, the tiny group of stuff which we disagree on, which actually has a lot of time very little bearing on our life.
Right. If we fixed everything up front, like I have a couple of foundational things. In fact, Anthony, I just published in 2023 an American Heart Association overview of diet patterns and how consistent they were with American Heart Association guidelines. And we looked at 10 different patterns, and some of those patterns had multiple sub patterns within them. But I would say the two most polar opposites were low fat vegan and ketogenic. I actually can't think of anything more like Republicans and Democrats than those two. And yet both of them emphasize eating more above ground vegetables, eating more whole foods, getting rid of as much added sugar as possible, and getting rid of as much refined grain as possible. And those are not trivial things. So in the US, those are all things we don't do. We don't eat enough vegetables. We don't eat enough whole foods. We eat a crap ton of added sugar and a crap ton of refined grain. So it's not like those are trivial. So kumbaya moment, if you could, the ketogenic and low-fat vegans could give each other a hug, because if you had a plate of steamed broccoli with olive oil on it and slivered almonds, that is vegan and ketogenic at the same time.
We never start debates though on what do we agree on. We always start debates on what do we not agree on. The most striking example of how we, even in the most disparate of ideologies, there is actually still common ground. I had back-to-back guests on the podcast. One was an advocate for a plant-based vegan lifestyle, and another was a hunter. And I was struck just in my own sort of diary entries and meditation afterwards that they actually have a common ground, that both of them are strongly concerned with animal welfare. This was a very ethical hunter, and he spoke to me at length about, how he takes a lot of time to study packs of animals, figure out which is the weakest in the herd, and then he has almost a ritualistic service over the animal after he kills it to acknowledge that this animal is going to feed me, to make sure there's a connection between him and the animal. And so many of us are hooked up in this system of using a proxy executioner to consume our meat. We go to the shop and we're so detached from the actual execution of an animal to our consumption of the animal. Like, I'm not even sure my sister knows that chickens are animals. I think she just thinks they appear in the supermarket as food. She's like, oh, gross, you killed an animal when I went fishing. It's like, yeah, well, you eat meat every day of the week. But it's a nice illustration of even two people that are, very opposite ideologies there's still common ground there.
Yeah, there's a really nice little chapter in Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals book where there's a vegan guy who builds slaughterhouses. What? Why would he do that? And he's like, I'm so into animal care that I would like for these places that do slaughter animals, and I don't really see a way getting around that. People are going to eat meat. They should be built in the most humane way possible. So it's a very intriguing chapter to see how that person reconciled their personal values with what their job was. And when you read it, it made sense.
Yeah, it's wild. We were chatting a little bit off air about kind of my background and your background, and I had an academic background briefly where I flirted with being a lawyer, trained as a lawyer, practiced for a little bit. And when I seen your amazing Netflix documentary, You Are What You Eat, if anyone hasn't seen your involvement in that, definitely go and check that out. But I was struck by a lot of time in academia, we see an academic reluctance from top academics to converse in the mainstream. And what I've noticed is when academics don't step into prominent roles, you have, for want of a worse word, we'll call them pseudo academics, do step in and fill these voids. So, first, congratulations for participating in it. But did you have an academic reluctance to get involved?
Not at all. No, I mean, not only do I do research, but I teach. I teach a lot of students, and science communication is really challenging because it can be super boring. So one of the things I definitely like to do is I actually love science. I think science is really fun. I'm fairly open-minded. I actually have a pretty strict diet. I eat a lot of things and I avoid a lot of other things, but I'm pretty open-minded to everybody that eats whatever they want, because I have seen people swear that they tried one thing and it didn't work, and the other thing that I don't actually like too much, and they say, oh my God, my skin cleared up, my blood levels cleared up. And I said, well, I really don't think you're lying. And so everybody's different. And I've done some studies where they didn't turn out the way I wanted, but it was cool. It was science. And I got to walk through the whole thing and say, you know what? I've changed my mind. I don't think it works that way. And so trying to communicate that in a way that's engaging and entertaining is pretty hard for most of us professors. So this opportunity to work with an award-winning documentary maker was just hands down. I said, yes, me, sign me up. The offer came and I quickly accepted.
What was your goal with it?
My goal was to do another study. I'm always trying to do another study. So let me just give you my quick background. I have a PhD in nutrition science, and my favorite kind of research is behavioral research, where you try to get people to actually change their behavior. And you do a randomized trial where they're trying some new diet, and we're looking to see if their blood values were changed or their weight. And in the 30 years I've been doing this, they can sort of track an arc that started out very nutrient oriented. So sometimes to be a scientist, you need to be isolationist and reductionist, are terms that we use. If we isolate this one variable, then we'll know what this one thing does. And the problem with food is there isn't really ever one thing that will change your health. And it's in the combination of things you eat it with. So the field of nutrition has shifted from nutrients to foods, and then even foods can be limiting. So it's nice that one food has a lot of fiber and no saturated fat, and another food has a lot of saturated fat and no fiber. They also have antioxidants with them. And they also have vitamins and minerals that you might need. And so the latest shift has been to patterns. So let's recognize, because people were gaming the system, Anthony. I'd ask somebody, so what diet are you on? Mediterranean? Great. What'd you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Well, I had an Egg McMuffin for breakfast and a Big Mac for lunch and a Whopper for dinner. And I said, where's the Mediterranean part? Well, I have a jigger of olive oil by my nightstand, and before I go to bed, I just chug that down. I said, the Mediterranean diet is not just olive oil. The Mediterranean diet is like a lifestyle, and it's legumes and it's whole grain breads and things like this. So this shift of patterns has been, I think, fantastic, getting people away from gaming their superfood. Here's the superfood of the week. As long as I eat that, I'm fine. But when you do get to patterns, from a scientific perspective, it's really hard because you actually have a lot of options. There isn't one way to eat Mediterranean or one way to eat vegan or one way to eat keto. And for me, it's a puzzle. Like, okay, how am I going to define it? How am I going to get people to eat it? How much am I going to teach them versus deliver food? How much am I going to assess how adherent they were? So in this latest Netflix thing that we did, we had 22 pairs of identical twins get randomly assigned, one to stay omnivorous and one to go vegan. And so in the whole study design plan, which is kind of fun, we thought, well, we don't have a ton of money. We're not going to follow them for 5 years or a year or even half a year. We're going to follow them for 8 weeks. That's what we've got the money for. How are we going to get them on board for a vegan diet quickly? We thought, food delivery. Let's actually just deliver food to them. That way, like on day one, they'll be adherent. But then we'll get grief from people who say, well, yeah, but no one can do that. We can't deliver food to everybody, and people can't do that on their own. So the design of the study was 4 weeks of food delivery and 4 weeks of cooking on your own. Is that the only way to do it? No. There's dozens of different ways we could have done it. We could have gone longer. We could have gone shorter. But that's sort of part of the puzzle approach that was really fun. And this idea of working with a guy who's going to be filming a select set of the twins as they went on this journey. And we don't know the results ahead of time. So we're going forward with whatever happens. It was a really exciting opportunity.
I had a little bit of a eureka moment with diet last year where I realized how complex it is. I was using a product which has since been discontinued, and I'm sorry to see it been discontinued, Super Sapiens, a continuous glucose monitor. And so I run a couple of experiments around this time. One was I was trying ketogenic for a little bit. Another was the Super Sapiens. But I'll tell you the Super Sapiens anecdote. So I went to bed, slept 8 hours, tracked my sleep, tracked my physical training the day before, woke up, weighed out my portion of oats on a digital scales, ate my portion of oats, and observed my blood sugar reading. And my blood sugar was X. The next day, same training, same as much as I could control, same sleep, same portion of oats digitally weighed. My blood sugar is nowhere near X. A totally different blood sugar response from the exact same amount of food in as much as I could control the situation. And then also trying out experimenting with keto, finding that's actually ridiculously impossible, but still experimenting, checking ketogenic levels, and just seeing the effect that exercise had on my levels, where I could have a meal, go for a walk, check my level, or have a meal, not go for a walk and check my level, and experience two totally different values. And I had this eureka moment saying, we can't look at health in a silo. We can't say, this is nutrition and we got to ring fence it. This is physical exercise, we ring fence it. This is sports psychology, we ring fence it. It's one organism and they're also interlinked.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if we're trying to make behavior change, think of the different types of people who can make a lot of changes very fast and stick with them. And for some people, that's overwhelming. It's more appropriate. Okay, so you're going to fix your diet or your sleep or your exercise, not all at once. Which one would you fix first? And so it's sort of in the medical field, that's called motivational interviewing. Which one do you think you're ready to change first? And you're more likely to be successful if you do that. But over time, I mean, actually, Anthony, the fun part is it's a journey. You have your whole life to do this. I would like to sort of bring it back to a cooking example. So let's say you don't cook a whole lot and you try to cook something and you burn it and it's mushy and whatever. You say, screw it, I suck as a cook. I will never cook again. Well, that would be stupid because you have to eat tomorrow and the day after. And the day after, cook it again, cook it on lower heat, cook it slower, add more herbs, add fewer herbs, make it spicier, make it less spicy. It's like that movie Groundhog Day where, for your food, you get to start over every day. This famous Bill Murray movie where, oh my God, it's always the same day when he wakes up and he gets to do it over again. With food, I wish people would lighten up a little and give themselves, some grace and patience. Wow, I tried this thing. It sounded really good. I heard this person talk about it, but wow, it really doesn't work for me. Maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe I'll try it again. Maybe I'll try it again after I have slept better. Maybe I'll try it again after I've exercised. We actually get a lot of do-overs here. And the thing I would warn people against are any of these things to say, this is the one thing you need to do. You just do this one thing, you'll be all set. It never works that way.
100%. You see these reductionist arguments where, if you just do this one thing, you're going to be healthy. If you just do this one thing, you're going to sleep better, where it's, it doesn't work like that. I wish it did work like that, but
what would be the fun in that? It's a challenge.
What do you think about the sort of the current state of the Western diet? We export our Western values with a lot of arrogance, saying, this is the way to live. This is the way government should function. This is the way freedom of information should move. This is the way consumerism should operate. Society should be built. And the Western diet, when I look at it, isn't something we should be too proud to export into other traditions. And it seems to be getting worse and worse with the advent of stuff like Deliveroo, Just Eat. I'm not sure if you have Just Eat in your part of the world, very similar to Deliveroo. Bring you, you flick an app, a meal will show up almost frictionless at your door. It arrives questionably fast. Let's just say that. I don't know how long it takes to cook this stuff, but it arrives pretty damn fast. What do you think of the way this Western culinary ecosystem is developing?
Yeah, well, it's trying to, so tell me if it's the same in Ireland, but, there's a running joke in the US. If you did sort of a global questionnaire of what people feared, was it terrorism? Was it war? Was it poverty? Was it famine? What do Americans fear? Inconvenience. Like more than anything else. They don't want it to be inconvenient. They want it to arrive. They don't want to do much work. And these businesses are popping up to support that. And to some degree, that is helpful for a subset of the population. that's working hard on stuff. But really, culinary literacy is something that's been lost, and maybe culinary sounds too snooty. So maybe it should just be food literacy.
Yeah.
So this idea of food literacy that, it grows everywhere. It's pretty accessible. Not many farmers anymore. I think in the US, if you went way back in time, like 1 out of every 7 people was involved in agriculture. And now it's 1 out of every 150 people is involved in some way in agriculture. It, it, yes. So part of what I feel like the Western lifestyle is importing is I don't understand how my laptop works. I don't understand how my phone works. I don't understand a lot of things. And oh my God, I don't understand food. Either I'm just going to eat whatever somebody says. That's too bad because food's very accessible. If you looked at the ingredients and the herbs, and it doesn't take that much time, especially when people are spending so much time watching TikTok or watching other things. Why don't you spend that time making yourself a little food? There's some pretty quick things to make that are tasty.
I don't think it's a good thing that we're removing friction from everything. These apps that are
Yeah.
frictionless and food shows up. Like if you think about the sort of mental health pandemic we have going on at the moment, happiness levels by any metric are lower than ever. More people are on antidepressants. And where we've moved as a society is like people are vastly more irritated now having to wait 60 seconds for a microwave than they were 2 hours for the oven to cook a chicken, or
Yep.
10 seconds for your internet browser to load an Amazon page versus 2 weeks it used to take for your book to show up when you ordered it from the local bookshop. This stuff is vastly more irritating than it used to be. So I think evolutionary boredom is a mechanism that's survived since the dawn of time because it fulfills a function. And now we're trying to paper over that function. Every moment has to be filled with attention, with productivity. You see guys going for a piss in the urinal and they're taking out their phone and they're on TikTok. They can't even take the 30 seconds to go for a piss distraction free.
It's a great point. And so food becomes such a great solution there. It's social, it's calming. If you just took the time to get some knife skills, it's kind of cool to have fun knife skills and chop things up really well. It's kind of fun to try out some new herbs. It's fun to try different cultures, right? And so there's so much great tasting food around the world. And if you look at the way evolution happened, a lot of that wasn't really fancy. The peasants had grains and beans and herbs, and think of all those trade wars back hundreds of years ago about spices. That was
Yeah.
really key. If you wanted to make food fun, you should put some herbs in it. It's not so much that it has to be this super fancy cut of meat or this other snooty organic thing. It's like, have a little set of herbs in your cupboard there and cook some things up and slow down.
Do you think there's a role for macro intervention, government intervention, community intervention, or does it boil down to personal responsibility?
So I'm not really expecting the government to do anything soon. I really think it's social norms, to be honest. So what's acceptable? So in the world, I'm in the world of public health, and there's a couple of public health campaigns that have been very successful: smoking less, putting on seatbelts, wearing condoms, that were avoided for a long time by people, and then they became social norms. Some of them are a little inexplicable. Why did people start belting up in their cars all the time? But if you look at the data, it really helped. God, if people just exercised more and cooked more, they'd be happier, calmer, for all kinds of reasons. Just taking that time, making that sort of fun again, making it not so much a burden. So one of the most fun things that I do now in my research career actually is work with chefs. And my running joke, which I've probably already spoiled right now, is I'm on the scientific advisory board of the CIA, but not the Central Intelligence Agency, but the Culinary Institute of America. And Anthony, what they clued me into a decade ago in hanging out with some of them and going to their chef conferences instead of a medical conference. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. I do both. I go to medical conferences and conferences where these chefs, and they came up with this term for me, unapologetic deliciousness. And it resonated so quickly with me. And I love this idea, like, who doesn't want to eat unapologetically, deliciously? But it has a special meaning for me, Anthony, because I can remember 20 years ago doing studies of things that, let's say, had high fiber, and it would lower your blood cholesterol. And that's been an easy thing to get grants for in my world, trying to lower bad cholesterol. And in my job, I have to get grants, run studies, and publish papers to keep my job. And some of those old days, I would sort of look at somebody and said, thank you for participating in this study. I know that cardboard that we fed you wasn't very tasty, and my face is kind of scrunching up, and I'm apologizing that you didn't get to have the tasty thing, that you had to have the cardboard in the study. But for medical science, it's important. Oh, I would be apologizing about food. And so when they said, why are you apologizing? We're chefs. We'll make everything taste great. We have this amazing hummus that tastes great. We've got this tabbouleh that tastes great. We've got all kinds of plant-based things, because that's what I like to study. Lots more plants in the food. And they said, God, I think of all the cultures around here. You can make this fairly fast and really tasty and unapologetically delicious. And that, it sounds tasty and it sounds fun. So part of changing this Western diet is to bring back the fun and the joy and the pleasure in food, but not going to the dark side of it's fun because it's full of sugar. It's fun because it's flavors exploding in your mouth with global cuisine.
Here's a question for you. So I have a friend who owns an airline, and he got one of his airplanes and he filled it with food critics for an experiment. And the food critics were prepared a meal on this flight by some of the best Michelin star chefs that he could get his hands on. And they submitted various reviews of the food after, but one review he told me about summed it up. He asked one of the guys, what did you think of the food? The 5-course, the filet mignon, like, it is incredible. I've never even been to a Michelin star restaurant, so I'm speculating as to what was served here, but it sounded delicious. And this one critic said to him on the way out, yeah, it was good, but it was still airplane food. And I thought, you know what, that's so powerful. And it got me wondering, a question I wanted to ask you: is there a physiological difference between the same food in a different setting?
Oh, yeah. And in particular, in an airplane, to be perfectly honest. I won't be able to roll this off my tongue and say exactly what it is. But when you're at 30,000 feet, something has changed with your sensory properties. So airplane food has always been an enormous challenge because of some sensory properties that change. So they're already, it probably could have been a boat cruise. Do you have anybody else who owns a boat cruise?
I don't.
So you need a comparison group for the airplane experiment, and I think it should be a boat. So try that next and come back to me.
How's your understanding of diet evolved through your career?
Oh, yeah, I do really think it has been this isolationist, reductionist path. So, well, let me go back. Let's see if your readers like this, your listeners like this. And if they don't, you can always cut it out. But I was a philosophy major undergrad when I was in college. Nothing to do with medicine at all. And when I finished college, I was a little disillusioned that I had gone to college at all, because I actually didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I thought maybe I should have done that before I went to college so I could study something more intentionally. But philosophy was a blast. I love philosophy, thinking, oh, there's no answer of the good and happiness and existentialism. You just have to come up with a solid, rational, logical argument for this. And then there was a girl involved who dumped me, and I tried to get her back, and she was a vegetarian and I wasn't. And I thought, maybe if I'll become a vegetarian, I'll get her back. That didn't work either. She still dumped me, but I actually really liked being a vegetarian. And much as you talked about earlier, for a sister who doesn't know that chicken doesn't come from the back of the store, but comes from the slaughterhouse, I thought, wow, my philosophy has always been loving animals and life. And I've been a meat eater all my life. And now I'm vegetarian. It's kind of easier than I thought. I think I'll keep this up. Oh, and while I was trying to be bohemian and go around and see some places in the world, it was easiest to get restaurant jobs. So I had worked in a lot of restaurants. So that was my first goal in life, at about 26 years of age, I'll have a vegetarian restaurant. But God, people used to make fun of my protein all the time. Oh, where are you going to get your protein? Aren't you going to fall over? And I said, I'm sure there's got to be an answer to this. So I started reading books, and I was getting nutrition textbooks for fun. And then I thought, you know what? I think if I get a master's degree and I open this restaurant, then when people challenge me, I'll say, not only do I own a restaurant, but I have a master's degree. And it was pretty funny because they wouldn't actually let me even apply to the graduate program because the only science course I had ever taken was Psych 101. I took all philosophy classes and I didn't have the background to apply, but I said, I'm willing. What do I need? And they said, you need 2 years of missing classes to even apply to our program, which was regular chem, biochem, organic chem, biology. I hadn't taken any of that, and I did it. I got all A's and A pluses as an older student with more focus. And then they said, wow, you're smarter than we thought. When you came in the first time, you didn't have a very good grade point average, but now it looks better. How about getting a PhD? And I thought, why would I get a PhD to open a restaurant? Just give me the master's degree and I'll go open my restaurant. But I actually liked being in school more at that point with a focus. And what was really frustrating for me is I did start applying for PhD programs and saw how much of it was mechanism oriented. I was very much into the behavioral cultural side of it. And most of the PhD programs in nutrition were very mechanistic. If you do isolate, do the reductionist thing with this one thing, what will happen? And I was more along the public health lines of, yeah, but what would it take to change someone's behavior? What can you use to motivate them? What can you use to maintain that? And so my introduction to this field was trying to draw that balance. Most of the stuff I was being taught was very mechanistic, but people wouldn't change their diet for mechanistic reasons. If it was more cultural or personal or aligned with their values. And so one of the big shifts in my whole career, Anthony, came at one point when a pediatrician named Tom Robinson and I applied to a National Institutes of Health grant opportunity in the US. And they specifically wanted to target young adults and prevent weight gain because it's so hard to help people lose weight. They said, let's just take a new angle here. Let's help people not gain weight in the first place. But young people feel so impervious. Let's do something novel. So somebody come up with something novel and propose it to us. And we proposed social responsibility and engagement. And it was never funded. But when we got rejected, we looked at each other and said, how could we have done a better job with this application? It would have been helpful to have pilot data. And so I said, where can you get pilot data with young adults? Oh my God, we're surrounded by students at Stanford. Let's propose a class and collect data on them. And we created a class that I teach to this day. It's 15 years, called Food and Society. And all we do in Food and Society is talk about climate change and food, animal rights and welfare and food, and labor abuses in things like slaughterhouses. And when this first happened to me in terms of the trajectory of my career in this area, this was like a huge light bulb. Oh my God, these are super motivating factors for young adults. These are things that aren't mechanistic at all. They're aligned with culture and personal values. And almost every kid in class got engaged in the conversation. They said, oh my God, we're sending these books home to our parents. I'm trying to get my brother or sister to change. My roommate doesn't want me to come in the room because I keep talking about what I was excited about learning in class today, and they just want me to shut up because I won't stop talking about it. That's pretty intoxicating. And so that was a huge shift for me to realize that sort of to keep my job, I need to do some standard nutrition studies that will get funded and published. And at the same time, what if I worked with chefs on unapologetic deliciousness and with young adults on aligning personal values with things that motivate food behavior changes? And so that has been a hugely important transition for me in my nutrition science career.
And it's interesting because that's exactly my experience when I have friends that I care deeply about and they're talking about how they want to lose weight. For years, I'd say to them, oh, like, well, here's your macros you need to be hitting. You need to do as many steps a day. And even explaining it sounded laborious explaining that. And, they'd be motivated at the start and they'd do it for a while and then they fall off the wagon. And then 6 months later, I'd meet them again. They'd say, oh, look, I want to get started again. And this rinse and repeat cycle would happen. And then I noticed that if you just tagged it to a behavior change, that it was so much easier. Someone would come to me, I really want to lose weight. I was like, forget that. We should start riding the bike at the weekend, or we should start running on Wednesday nights. And then the question comes back from them, hey, how do I get faster on the bike? The bike is essentially just two variables, power and weight. It's kind of hard to add power. If you start taking a little bit of weight off, you're going to go faster. And it gamified it for them as well, because the local climb, it was taking them 15 minutes. Then they could see the progress. They lost 2 pounds. Actually, it only took me 14 and a half minutes to go up at 2 pounds lighter. Then they dig into the data on it and they'd say, what's the relationship between weight and the speed I can travel? I say, well, on a 10-kilometer climb that averages 7% gradient, if you lose 2.2 pounds, which is a kilogram, you're going to go 1 minute faster if we keep everything else equal, same power, same air density, wind direction, etc.
Wow.
And they really got into it. And I've seen lasting change in friends through that. Exactly, you're saying, like tagging a habit to a behavior.
And then for me, another part of the epiphany, Anthony, was recognizing that not all the messages resonated with everyone. There isn't any one message. And so, the first kid in class toward the end of the quarter, I said, I'm going to teach this class again. I'd love to know what you liked or didn't like. And the first student said, wow, the whole personal value thing about animal rights and welfare really hit me. And I've changed my diet because of that. I've gone vegetarian. And the next kid said, I grew up on a ranch. We actually raised our animals really well, took great care of them. I don't buy that argument at all. But wow, the climate change thing. Oh, I'm definitely eating regenerative farm, grass-fed beef, and I'm not eating any more fast food. And as you went around, everybody kind of had a different take on what motivated them. But if you had enough of those, in your tool chest, you could almost get everybody, because food is hooked to so many things. You can find a cultural, behavioral, environmental, ethical angle on this, and you can get most people engaged. And then I find out when you do, I actually call it stealth nutrition now. Stealth, not in terms of being deceitful. I'm not trying to trick them, but stealth in terms of, oh, you really don't want to understand cholesterol metabolism? It's super cool about how it goes to the liver and a lipoprotein and no, I can see your eyes glazing over. Okay, well, let's talk about the difference between coconut fat and avocados and all these different fats in your diet and cultural appropriateness here. Something else will hook them.
I wonder, will it? I had a sea rescue swimmer on the podcast before. His job was, when there's unimaginable storms, when ships are turned over and blown away by the wind, he goes out in a helicopter, or a pilot goes out in a helicopter, and he jumps from the helicopter into the Atlantic Ocean and he saves people that are gone overboard. And I asked him the question, what do you do if you jump into the water and there's more people in the water than there are places in the helicopter? And he said this will happen to every rescue swimmer once or twice in the course of their career. And he said it happened to him once, only a couple of months before. And I said, what do you do? And he said, you can only save the people that swim towards you. And I thought that's such a powerful lesson for a lot of aspects of life. You can only save people that want to be saved. And I wonder, does that apply to nutrition?
Oh, it absolutely does. Like, it's for a lot of people, things build up over time. To be honest, I don't know how arrogant this sounds, but the Netflix movie seems to have really hit this home for me. I got thousands of emails of people changing their diet. And one of the part of the message that always came through was, I was on the way there, and this was the thing that made me switch.
The last touch point.
Yeah, it wasn't like, oh my God, I was this other person and I saw my whole life transformed. They were on the path that way. And this was the extra nudge. And I'll bet there's a whole bunch of people where this wasn't the last nudge. This was the first nudge. And so they didn't change. But if this becomes more of a social norm, just eating more plants, not trying to get the world to go vegan here, by the way, just trying to get people to eat more plants than they do, some other thing, it'll be a girlfriend dumping them like happened to me, or it'll be they'll go get a medical report and they'll say, yeah, you're pretty much in trouble and we're going to put you on these drugs or do some big surgery on you. No. I want to try to fix this myself. That's the nudge I need, right? So you're right. It's a touch point. They build up over time. And when that person's ready to swim toward you, be ready to welcome them, but don't be discouraged that not everybody's ready to swim toward you. That's not the way life works.
The Netflix is brilliant format because it's almost very few people flick off it. People will flick off a YouTube video, they'll flick off something else. You almost have them like it's more of a captive audience, and there's a depth with it. Even if 10 million people don't watch it, which I'm probably more than 10 million people watch it, but if a billion people don't watch the show, that's okay because that's a width measurement. What you're getting is a depth measurement. You're getting their undivided attention for a long time. And you could have 100 million people watching a 10-second TikTok. I don't think that's going to elicit the same change as having that meaningful interaction for 60, 90 minutes. But I wonder, is there a width versus depth thing in nutrition as well? When I think about protein and someone says, well, my RDA of protein is whatever they say, depending on what their goal is, putting on muscle or preserving muscle, it's 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day. Is there a difference? There undoubtedly is, but help me understand it. The wild caught salmon who is battling against currents all day, he's fighting predators, he's genetically adapted. It's been years of this gene passed down, a survival gene. When I eat that fish, I feel like I'm eating this warrior that's been in this survival mode versus the factory farmed fish I compare it the difference between eating the world's best UFC fighter, a Conor McGregor or a Dustin Poirier, versus the gamer who sits at home eating potato chips and drinking soda all day. They're the same species, but they're not really the same species. Does the quality of protein differ, and can we measure that?
So I wouldn't say the quality of the protein matters. So basically, here, let's be mechanistic, and this one's really easy to answer. So all protein comes in long strings of amino acids, and that would be a supplement or an animal or a plant. And your body can't absorb it unless it's a single amino acid. And then once that single amino acid is absorbed, it's combined with lots of other ones, and you make all the new proteins that you need. It's completely agnostic to whether it was a plant source, an animal source, or a supplement. However, it came with things. So that warrior fish was missing some of the things that the farm fish had in it that they were using to make them survive. They colored it pink so it would look like salmon that was wild caught, and they added some antibiotics because they were getting sick, all clustered together in that farmed fish thing. Whereas the warrior built up its own antioxidants, its own defenses as it was doing this. And this is actually true for a lot of foods. If you got foods in the wild, they would have more natural antioxidants. If you're trying to spray pesticides on everything, not only are you getting rid of some of the weeds and bugs, but you're doing some of the plant's work for it. And yes, you're getting a huge yield and you're getting a lot of calories. But one of the things that we don't understand, Anthony, in nutrition is beyond the basic protein, fat, carb, vitamin, and mineral, there's thousands of chemicals in food. We call them phytochemicals, we call them antioxidants and things like this. And there's lots of additives that go into our convenient food these days. So I wouldn't say it's the quality of the protein. I would say it's the quality of the meal, the quality of the animal, the quality of the plant. That would make a difference. And yet, that's really hard to study. So I can't do a very crisp, clean study and say, Anthony, I want you and your identical twin. I want you to be the hunter and the gatherer and go out live in the outback of Australia. And I want your twin just to only eat fast food. But somehow we're going to match them. It's going to be the same amount of meat and the same amount of plants, but they're either going to be natural and wild or they're going to be processed. It would be a very cool study. It actually was done years ago. I brought up Aborigines because they took some people with Aboriginal ancestry out of Australia and they put them in the wild and their diabetes went away. It's a super cool study. But my follow-up question was, did they all just decide to live in the wild after that, or did they go back to Sydney?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they all went back to Sydney. So sorry if that was too much of a rant about your warrior fish, but that would be the idea. The protein's the same, but the food as a whole isn't the same.
So is observational data, is that valid? Like we're in this world of everything has to be peer reviewed, but coming from my background in law, I had a lot of exposure to a case where you have two expert witnesses that are called, one for defense and one for prosecution, both very nice credentials on paper, arguing totally opposing viewpoints. And I default a lot of time to observational data, like, just to explain to the audience, like I can look out the window now and if the ground is dry, and then I look out the window in an hour, the ground is wet. I don't need to have seen the rain. I don't need to see the study to see that it rained. I can use my previous experience to go, hey, it must have rained in the last hour, the ground's wet. If I have a meal with organic vegetables, with the wild caught salmon, and I feel amazing after, I sleep better, I'm in a better mood, I feel more energized. Is it valid for me to then from that deduce, hey, this type of food, for a reason I can't explain, just vibes better with me?
Yeah, if we listen to our bodies more, it would help a lot. So, but that would be personal observation. So let me make one clarification. There's a lot of social media influencers who are down, and armchair scientists are down on observational studies. And the observational studies, for me, I cite them all the time in my research because the clear advantage there is they collect data on tens of thousands of people and follow them for decades. And they know who lives or dies. In my study, I only know whose cholesterol went up or down, whose blood pressure went up or down. I don't actually know if I kept them out of the hospital. So the observational studies as a whole in my field are great because they track people for so long. You could never get anyone to agree to be on that diet or avoid all those things for decades. I can only get them to agree to try something new for weeks or months or years at a time. But your specific example is just you as a human being seeing your energy level and how well you're sleeping. That should be incredibly powerful. And I'm here in Silicon Valley where people are biohacking all the time and doing some pretty goofy things.
I hate that term.
I wish
it's like a shortcut away from the hard work. Like, how do you biohack getting your PhD?
Yeah.
Like anything that's worth doing, it takes. Someone asked me a shortcut to, growing a podcast. I was like, I don't know, you're asking the wrong person. I'm on episode 1000. If I knew the shortcut, I would have taken it.
Right. Yeah. And again, to me, that brings up the fun. I loved hearing you say what you were experimenting with and your glucose values seemingly with the same sleep and the same exercise just the next day were different. That tells you how variable it is. It's not a solid number. When you go to your doc and you get your blood pressure reading, your cholesterol reading, your glucose reading, that doesn't define you. Those go up and down all the time. And I think it would help people to understand how much those fluctuate. And it's really has to be a pattern and a set of numbers over time that say you're in a higher risk or a lower risk or you're making progress. And weight is obviously a super easy one to measure. I'm standing on the scale and here's how heavy I am now and how heavy I've been. But a lot of personal intuition there is fine and gives me the idea for a study.
One that's not easy to measure is mental health, like the link between how food makes me feel. Like if we eat enough, I don't know what makes people depressed, but all I can speak to is what makes me happy. I know when I sleep well, when I hydrate well, when I exercise, and when I eat well, I'm happy. If I don't do that stuff, it's like, oh, hello, darkness, my old friend. What's the link between diet and mental health?
So there is a direct link and it's growing, and there are more people starting to study this. So that isn't the type of study that I do, but in the future, let me tell you a meeting that I'm having later today. So I am not a fan of the ketogenic diet. I think it's crazy from a cardiometabolic perspective. There is a Stanford investigator who recently did a study. There was no control group to it. It was a pilot study. It was people with mental illness and depression. And she put them on a ketogenic diet, and a lot of them improved. I want to talk to her. That isn't this kind of study that I do. And what I really want to do is I want to understand what she meant by ketogenic, what they ate and they're calling ketogenic. Because just because you name it that, I've observed that a lot of people aren't really following it the way it was intended.
And well, I tried it and I tracked it, and I can only speak to my experience, but incredibly difficult to stay on.
Yeah.
Like I was, as well as expensive, even getting them ketogenic strips, the testing strips, like that costs a fortune if you're religiously testing. But like the discipline required, and someone that spent a large chunk of their life being a full-time athlete, discipline is not an area I've struggled with. Military-like discipline to stay in a ketogenic state, I'm just not sure that's a solution for anyone but the most acute like treatments.
Yeah. As I said, I am not a fan. But their theory was there was something about ketones in the brain for mental illness. And if there is anything there, I would love to be able to help people with mental illness. And maybe, I did a study of ketogenic versus Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean was a very high fat, low carb Mediterranean diet. That is the thing that I would push. Getting rid of all the added sugars and refined grains is probably the biggest benefit that you can have. And keto eliminating all beans and all fruits and all grains, I just can't understand. And you're right, I can't. In our study, we couldn't get people to follow it. But I'm open-minded, especially for mental health and illness type issues. I have seen published studies of being on a more plant-based diet is beneficial for mental health issues. So I'm going to listen to both sides on this and be open.
Just to finish up, last question is, I know a lot of people are taking this conversation and it's going to be a catalyst for change for them to, much like the Netflix documentary, to start to explore a change. When I look at physical activity, be that running, rowing, cycling, whatever it is, we've three different levers that we can typically pull. We try to pull the frequency lever, that's how often someone can train, the duration lever, that's how long they can train, and then the intensity, how hard we're going to train. We don't ever touch duration or touch intensity until we've established frequency, until we've built the habit. How can we work on building a habit of healthy eating for someone who's now indulging in frequent takeaways, frequent eating out, their diet is haphazard? How would we build a healthy eating habit?
Yeah, well, it's going to be different for everyone. My simple trick would be, do some soul searching, and I'm sure you could come up with whatever you think is the thing you currently do the most frequently that is the least helpful for you, and pick that one thing and replace it. I have a colleague who did this in a really clever way, and they said, don't just try one time to replace it. Try to replace that one thing that you think is the worst for you with something else, and it has to taste and be just as satisfying. And if it's not that one thing, try at least 5 things. And of the 5, if you come up with something that tastes just as good and is just as convenient, then you've swapped out the worst thing in your diet, and then you can go for the second worst thing. But part of this is the experimentation of don't penalize yourself, don't be punitive, don't be stoic, because that won't last. You have to find something that you enjoy culturally and socially, and it's convenient enough. And it's not going to happen the first thing that you switch it with. So be willing to try 5 other things and pick the best one of those and make that your new habit. And it could be very empowering.
That's brilliant advice. Professor Christopher Gardner, you're making a valuable contribution to the way people live their lives. So thank you very much for that, and continue the good work.
Thanks for having me on, and good luck with the next 1,000 episodes, Anthony.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And we're just getting started, so subscriptions really matter. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.